"He put something in your pie, ma'am," warned the little beggar girl, daughter of a single father. 2 hours later, "Just before we begin, your presence means a lot. Say hi and share where you're tuning in from, only if you want to." The aroma of French pastries and imported coffee beans filled Charlotte's senses as she adjusted her Hermès blazer and checked her Cartier watch. 2:47 p.m. The merger meeting with Blackstone Industries was scheduled for 3, and this neutral location had been carefully chosen. At 26, Charlotte had built Mason Technologies into a $200 million empire, but today's acquisition could triple that fortune overnight. "Ms. Mason?" The maitre d' approached with practiced elegance, his movements refined from years of serving Manhattan's elite. "Your private booth is ready, Mr. Blackstone should arrive momentarily." Charlotte nodded, her emerald eyes scanning the opulent interior with the calculating gaze that had made her fortune. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across walls lined with gold leaf, each fixture worth more than most people's annual salary. Every table was adorned with fresh orchids flown in from Thailand, and uniformed servers moved like silent dancers between the wealthy clientele, who treated million-dollar deals like casual conversation. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, she noticed a small figure pressed against the pristine glass. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, with tangled brown hair that caught the afternoon sunlight and clothes that had clearly seen better days. The child's bright blue eyes were fixed on the display of elaborate cakes with an intensity that spoke of genuine hunger, her breath fogging the spotless window as she traced imaginary patterns with her small finger. "Miss, you need to move along," a security guard was saying, approaching the child with obvious irritation and the kind of disdain reserved for those who dared to disturb the carefully maintained atmosphere of exclusivity. Charlotte felt a familiar tug in her chest, memories of her grandmother's stern voice echoing through time. Eleanor Mason had built her own fortune from nothing, but she'd never forgotten her humble beginnings. "Privilege without purpose is just selfishness, Charlotte," she'd always said. Still, today wasn't the day for charity work or sentimental gestures. This meeting could secure her company's future and establish her as one of the youngest tech moguls in American history. "The Blackstone party has arrived," the maitre d' announced, with the kind of reverence reserved for visiting royalty. Richard Blackstone entered with his usual swagger, silver hair perfectly styled despite the October wind, accompanied by his son Marcus and their head attorney, a sharp-eyed woman who looked like she ate smaller companies for breakfast. At 55, Richard commanded respect in every room he entered, his presence filling the space like expensive cologne. But Charlotte had learned not to trust his shark-like smile or the calculating gleam in his steel-gray eyes. "Charlotte, darling," Richard's voice boomed as he air-kissed both her cheeks with the false intimacy of someone who viewed affection as another business tool. "You look absolutely radiant as always. Success suits you beautifully." Marcus, 32 and undeniably handsome in that trust fund way that money could buy, lingered slightly too long when taking her hand, his fingers warm and possessive. She'd rejected his advances numerous times over the past year, but he seemed to view this merger as more than just a business transaction, as if acquiring her company might somehow give him access to her as well. "Shall we get started?" Charlotte kept her tone professionally cool as they settled into the plush velvet booth that probably cost more than most people's cars. The server approached with nervous energy barely contained beneath his professional exterior. David Henley, according to his name tag, looked to be in his early 20s with the kind of desperate eyes that suggested he needed this job more than most. "Good afternoon, distinguished guests. May I suggest our signature afternoon tea selection? Or perhaps individual desserts from our award-winning pastry chef?" "I'll have the chocolate torte," Charlotte decided quickly, her mind already focused on the contract negotiations ahead. "And coffee black, no cream, no sugar." As David disappeared toward the kitchen with careful, measured steps, Charlotte noticed the little girl outside had been joined by a man who was clearly her father. He was tall but thin, wearing faded jeans and a worn flannel shirt that had been carefully patched at the elbows, the kind of meticulous repair work that spoke of pride despite poverty. His weathered hands, marked by years of manual labor, rested protectively on the child's small shoulders as he spoke to her in quiet Spanish, his voice carrying the gentle authority of a parent who loved fiercely despite having little to give. "Now, about the acquisition terms," Richard began, spreading documents across the mahogany table with the confidence of a man who'd never heard the word no in any context that mattered. "We're prepared to offer $3.2 billion for full ownership of Mason Technologies, including all patents, personnel, and future development rights." Charlotte's pulse quickened despite her attempts to remain composed. It was significantly more than she'd expected, enough to make her one of the youngest billionaires in the country. That's certainly generous, Richard, but I want to maintain creative control of my AI division. That's non-negotiable. Marcus leaned forward, his cologne, something expensive and cloying, overwhelming the delicate sense of the pastries around them. Charlotte, you're brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But you'll need our resources and infrastructure to compete on a global scale. Let us take care of the business side while you focus on innovation. Something in his tone made her skin crawl, the patronizing undertone that suggested he viewed her as a pretty ornament to be acquired rather than a formidable business owner. She maintained her composure through years of practice dealing with men who underestimated her. I don't need taking care of, Marcus. I need a partnership that respects my vision and maintains my autonomy. David returned with visible nervousness, setting down her torte with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. The dessert was a work of art that belonged in a museum. Dark chocolate mousse layered with raspberry coulis, topped with edible gold leaf and crystallized flowers that probably cost more than David made in a week. Outside, the little girl was tugging urgently on her father's sleeve, pointing with increasing agitation at something inside the restaurant that had clearly captured her attention. The man looked confused and slightly embarrassed, glancing between his daughter and the patisserie windows with the expression of someone who knew they didn't belong in this world of casual luxury. Emily necesitamos irnos, Charlotte heard him say through the thick glass, his voice carrying the tired resignation of a man who'd grown accustomed to being unwelcome in places like this. We can't bother these people with our problems. Emily. The name suited her somehow, carrying an old-fashioned dignity that seemed to match the intelligence blazing in her young eyes. But the child wasn't giving up. Her small hands pressed against the window with desperate urgency as she continued pointing and speaking rapidly, in a mixture of Spanish and English that her father was clearly struggling to understand. The terms are non-negotiable. Richard's voice brought Charlotte's attention back to the table with the force of a slammed door. Full ownership, complete control, or no deal whatsoever. That's our final offer. Charlotte lifted her fork, considering her options with the same analytical mind that had built her empire from a college dorm room idea. This merger could make her incredibly wealthy, set for life, able to pursue any dream or whim that struck her fancy. But something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire situation. Richard's eagerness was too intense, too desperate, and Marcus kept glancing at his Rolex as if timing something specific, his leg bouncing with barely contained nervous energy. She was about to take her first bite when the world exploded into absolute chaos with the force of a bomb going off. Stop! The scream came from outside, high-pitched and desperate, cutting through the genteel atmosphere like a knife through silk. He colocó algo na sua torta, señora. Don't eat it. Every head in the patisserie turned toward the windows as if choreographed, conversations dying mid-sentence. Emily was pressed against the glass with both palms flat, her small fists pounding frantically against the expensive barrier separating her from the people inside. Her father was trying to pull her away, his face flushed red with the kind of embarrassment that came from drawing unwanted attention in a place where they clearly didn't belong. I am so sorry, he called through the glass, his accent marking him as a recent immigrant still struggling with English pronunciation. She has very active imagination, por favor. We go now, no trouble. But Emily broke free from his gentle grasp with the determination of someone fighting for a life, and ran toward the entrance with the speed that only terror could provide. The security guard moved to intercept her with practiced efficiency, but she was small and desperate and quick in the way that only children could be. Before anyone could react or process what was happening, she'd burst through the heavy glass doors and was running straight toward Charlotte's table with single-minded purpose. Señora, angel lady, don't eat the chocolate. Emily's voice cracked with terror as she skidded to a stop beside the booth, her chest heaving from exertion and fear. The bad man, he put something terrible in your pretty cake, something that makes people go to sleep forever like my mama. The patisserie fell into the kind of complete silence that only followed shocking revelations, the only sound the gentle classical music still playing overhead as if nothing had changed. Charlotte stared at the child, fork frozen halfway to her mouth, while Emily's blue eyes blazed with the kind of certainty that comes from witnessing something horrible and knowing that no one would believe a 7-year-old homeless girl over the word of respectable adults in expensive clothes. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds before Marcus shot to his feet so violently that his chair scraped against the marble floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. This is absolutely ridiculous. His voice carried the indignation of someone whose careful plans were being disrupted by an inconvenient witness. Security should have kept that vagrant child outside where she belongs. Emily flinched at his harsh tone but stood her ground, her small chin raised with the kind of dignity that couldn't be bought or taught. I'm not lying, senor. I saw the bad man put white powder from a little bag into the chocolate lady's cake when he thought nobody was watching him. Charlotte found herself studying David's face with the intensity she usually reserved for reading financial reports, and what she saw there made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. Guilt. Terror. The unmistakable expression of someone whose carefully constructed facade had just crumbled in front of witnesses. His face had gone completely white, and his hands were shaking so badly that he could barely hold his serving tray. What are you talking about, little girl? Richard's voice boomed with the authority of someone accustomed to controlling every situation through sheer force of personality. This is preposterous. We're in one of the finest establishments in Manhattan, not some back alley dive. Emily turned to face him directly, and Charlotte was struck by the child's complete lack of intimidation, despite being surrounded by powerful adults who clearly viewed her as an inconvenience. I saw everything through the big window, senor. The man went to the back room and came out with the tray. But before he brought it to the angel lady, he stopped by the wall where the flowers are, where nobody inside could see him good. She pointed with a steady finger at David, who looked like he was about to either run or vomit. He looked around real careful to make sure nobody was watching, but I could see him perfect from outside. He took out a little white bag from his pocket and poured powder on the chocolate cake. Then he stirred it with his finger and licked his finger clean after. The detail about licking his finger was so specific, so oddly precise, that Charlotte felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Why would a child make up such an elaborate lie? And why did David look like he was about to collapse from sheer panic? Emily's father finally reached them, out of breath and mortified beyond description. Perdóname, por favor. I am so sorry to all of you, he panted, reaching for his daughter's hand. Emily, she has very big imagination since her mother died. She sees things that aren't really there sometimes. Please forgive us, we go away now and never bother you again. No, Papa. Emily jerked away from his grasp, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged cheeks. I'm not making up stories this time. I'm not crazy like the doctor said. I saw the bad man hurt the pretty lady's food. The raw pain in her voice hit Charlotte like a physical blow. This wasn't the manufactured drama of a child seeking attention. This was genuine terror from someone who'd witnessed something horrible and was desperate to prevent a tragedy that only she could see coming. Call the police, Charlotte said quietly, her voice cutting through the increasingly heated arguments around the table. Marcus let out a harsh laugh that held no humor whatsoever. Charlotte, don't be ridiculous. You can't seriously believe the wild accusations of some homeless street child over. Call them now. Charlotte's voice dropped to the tone she used in board meetings when she was done negotiating and ready to make final decisions. I want the police here immediately. That's when David dropped his serving tray with a crash that echoed through the stunned patisserie like a gunshot, sending porcelain plates and crystal glasses shattering across the expensive marble floor. Before anyone could react, he was running toward the kitchen entrance with the desperate speed of someone whose life depended on escape. Stop him! Charlotte shouted as she stood, her chair toppling backward in her haste. The security guard, a burly ex-cop named Torres who'd seen enough in his 20-year career to recognize guilt when he saw it, was already in motion. Years of training and instinct kicked in as he pursued the fleeing server through the maze of elegant tables, sending startled customers scrambling out of the way and knocking over arrangements of exotic flowers that cost more than most people's monthly rent. This is completely insane. Marcus grabbed Charlotte's arm roughly, his fingers digging into her skin with enough force to leave bruises. You're going to destroy this entire deal over the delusions of some drug-addicted vagrant's daughter. Charlotte jerked free with more violence than she'd ever used against another person, her eyes never leaving the chase that was unfolding in front of them. If she's wrong, we'll know soon enough, and I'll personally apologize to everyone involved. But if she's right... She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to spread. Emily had pressed herself against her father's legs, tears still streaming down her face as she watched the chaos she'd unleashed with the expression of someone who knew she'd done the right thing, even if nobody believed her. Her father, Miguel, kept one protective arm around his daughter while staring in shocked bewilderment at the scene unfolding before them, clearly wondering how their quiet afternoon of window shopping had somehow turned into a police matter. Mija, he whispered in Spanish, his voice thick with concern and confusion. ¿Qué has hecho? What have you done to these people? I saved her, Papa. Emily replied in English, her voice small but absolutely certain. The angel lady was going to die just like Mama did, but I stopped it from happening this time. Torres tackled David just as he reached the kitchen doors, sending both men crashing into an elaborate dessert cart, with enough force to send eclairs and petit fours scattering across the marble floor in a chaos of cream and delicate pastry that represented hours of skilled labor destroyed in seconds. Let me go! David struggled frantically against the security guard's professional restraint, his voice cracking with desperation. You don't understand what you're doing. They'll kill me if I don't finish this. They'll kill my little sister if the plan doesn't work. He caught himself mid-sentence, his eyes going wide as he realized what he'd just admitted in front of a room full of witnesses. But it was far too late to take back words that confirmed every terrible suspicion that had been growing in Charlotte's mind. The confession hung in the air like a smoking gun, impossible to ignore or explain away. Richard Blackstone's face had transformed from its usual confident ruddiness to an alarming shade of gray that suggested his blood pressure had just spiked to dangerous levels. This must be some kind of terrible misunderstanding, he stammered, his usual commanding presence cracking like a dam under pressure. David, what are you talking about? What plan? Who's threatening you? But David's wild eyes were fixed on Charlotte with a mixture of terror and something that looked almost like relief, as if confessing his crime had lifted a weight he'd been carrying for weeks. I'm so sorry, Ms. Mason, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the murmur of frightened customers and the distant sound of approaching sirens. I never wanted to hurt you. I swear on my sister's life. But they said they'd hurt Rosa if I didn't do exactly what they told me to do. They said it would look like a heart attack, that you wouldn't suffer, that it would be quick and clean. The words hit Charlotte like physical blows, each revelation worse than the last. Someone had orchestrated an elaborate murder plot against her, using an innocent young man's sister as leverage to turn him into an unwilling assassin. But who had that kind of reach and resources? Who would benefit from her death? Her gaze fell on Marcus, who had gone completely pale and was edging toward the exit with the kind of casual movements that suggested he was trying not to draw attention to his departure. Something about his body language, the way he kept glancing at his phone and checking the time, set off every alarm bell that years of business negotiations had fine-tuned in her mind. The police arrived with sirens wailing and lights flashing, their squad cars pulling up outside the patisserie's elegant facade like an invasion from a grittier world. Detective Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd built her reputation on seeing through lies and getting to the truth no matter how many powerful people preferred it buried, was the first through the door, followed by 2 uniformed officers and a paramedic team ready for any emergency. NYPD. Nobody leaves this building until we've sorted out what happened here. Detective Chen's voice cut through the murmur of frightened customers like a knife through butter. Her experienced gaze quickly assessed the scene. The overturned furniture, the scattered remains of expensive pastries, Torres holding David in a professional restraint position, and Charlotte standing protectively near Emily and Miguel like a guardian angel who'd found her purpose. Who called this in? Chen asked, approaching Charlotte's table with the measured steps of someone who'd seen enough crime scenes to know that first impressions could be deceiving. I did, Charlotte said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded when her entire world had just been turned upside down. This little girl warned me that someone had poisoned my dessert, and she was absolutely right. Detective Chen's eyebrows rose as she looked down at Emily, who was now clinging to her father's worn jacket, but meeting the detective's gaze with the kind of direct honesty that children possessed before the world taught them to lie. Is that true, sweetheart? Can you tell me exactly what you saw? Emily nodded solemnly, wiping her nose with the back of her small hand. I saw the bad man put white powder in the pretty lady's chocolate cake. It looked exactly like the medicine that made my mama go to sleep forever and never wake up again. The innocent words hit Miguel like a physical blow, his weathered face crumpling with grief that was still raw even 2 years after losing his wife. Elena had died from an accidental overdose, not intentional, but the tragic result of mixing prescription painkillers with alcohol while grieving the loss of their home to foreclosure. Emily had been the one to find her mother's still form the next morning, a trauma that had left the 7-year-old with an almost supernatural ability to recognize the signs of danger that adults often missed. Detective Chen knelt to Emily's eye level with the kind of gentle patience that came from years of interviewing traumatized witnesses, her voice soft but professionally focused. Can you tell me exactly what you saw, sweetheart? Take your time and tell me everything you remember. Emily wiped her eyes with the back of her small hand, leaving streaks in the dirt on her cheeks, but her voice grew stronger and more confident as she began to tell her story. We were outside looking at all the pretty cakes in the window because Papa says we can't afford to buy them, but we can still look and dream about what they taste like. The bad man came from the back room carrying a tray with the chocolate cake on it. She paused, gathering her thoughts with the careful precision of someone who knew that getting the details right was critically important. But before he brought it to the angel lady, he stopped by the wall where all the big flowers are, where nobody sitting inside could see him good because of the way the wall sticks out. Detective Chen made careful notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail. What happened next? The bad man looked around real careful to make sure nobody was watching him, turning his head both ways like when Papa checks for cars before we cross the street. But I could see him perfect through the big window because I was standing in just the right place. He took out a little paper bag from his front pocket, the kind that medicines come in sometimes. Emily demonstrated with her small hands, showing the size and shape of what she'd witnessed. He opened the bag and poured white powder right on top of the chocolate part of the cake. Then he stirred it around with his finger to make it disappear into the dark chocolate. After he stirred it, he licked his finger clean and put the empty bag back in his pocket. The detail about licking his finger made Detective Chen's expression sharpen with the look of someone who recognized a crucial piece of evidence. Did you see what he did with the bag after that? He put it back in his front pocket, the left one, and smoothed down his shirt to make sure nobody could see the bump it made, Emily said with the kind of observational precision that would have impressed a trained surveillance specialist. One of the uniformed officers immediately began searching David, who was still being held by Torres, and within moments he pulled out a small glassine bag containing traces of white powder that made everyone in the vicinity take an instinctive step backward. Field test shows fentanyl, the officer announced grimly after running a quick chemical analysis. Concentrated enough to kill multiple people, not just one. The gasps from the remaining customers were audible throughout the elegant space, and Charlotte felt her knees go weak as the full reality of what she'd narrowly escaped hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest. If not for a 7-year-old homeless girl with incredibly observant eyes and the courage to speak up when it mattered, she would have died within minutes of eating that tort, probably convulsing and choking while everyone around her thought she was having some kind of allergic reaction or heart attack. Detective Chen stood, her expression grave with the weight of attempted murder. Ms. Mason, you just avoided a very sophisticated assassination attempt. Someone wanted you dead badly enough to plan this for weeks or months. Charlotte found her voice, though it sounded strange and distant to her own ears. But why would anyone want to kill me? I run a technology company, not a drug cartel. I've never hurt anyone or done anything that would justify murder. That's what we're going to find out, Chen said with the determination of someone who'd built her career on getting justice for victims. She turned to David, who was now crying openly with the kind of raw emotion that suggested his confession had broken something inside him. Son, you're in serious trouble here. But if you cooperate fully and help us understand what happened, we might be able to help you and protect your sister. They have Rosa. David broke down completely, his body shaking with sobs that came from the deepest part of his soul. She's only 15 years old, just a kid who never hurt anybody. They took her 3 days ago and said if I didn't do exactly what they told me, if the plan failed for any reason, they'd kill her and make it look like a gang shooting. Please, detective, you have to find her before they realize something went wrong. Charlotte's mind was reeling from the implications, trying to process the fact that someone had orchestrated such an elaborate murder plot, using an innocent teenager as leverage to force her brother into becoming an unwilling assassin. But who had that kind of resources and connections? Who would benefit from her death enough to risk kidnapping and murder charges? Her gaze fell on Marcus, who was now openly sweating despite the cool October air conditioning, his phone pressed to his ear as he whispered urgently to someone on the other end. Something about his body language, the way he kept glancing toward the exit and checking his expensive watch, set off every instinct she'd developed through years of reading people in high-stakes business negotiations. Detective, she called out, pointing directly at Marcus with a steady finger. I think you should prevent him from leaving until we understand what's really happening here. Chen's head snapped up, her trained instincts immediately alert to the possibility that one of the people in the room might be connected to the crime. Sir, I need you to stay exactly where you are until we've taken everyone's statement and figured out what's going on. Marcus froze with his hand on the ornate door handle, and for a moment, Charlotte thought he might actually try to run, which would have been the final confirmation of his guilt. But then his shoulders sagged in defeat like a balloon losing air, and he turned to face them all with an expression of someone whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this," he muttered, his voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the sudden silence that had fallen over the room. Richard Blackstone's face went from gray to completely ashen, the blood draining out of his features as he realized what his son's words implied. "Marcus, shut your mouth right now. Don't say another word until our attorney gets here." But Marcus seemed beyond caring about legal consequences, as if the weight of what he'd done had finally become too heavy to carry in silence. He turned to face them all, his handsome features twisted with guilt and desperation, and something that looked almost like relief at finally being caught. "Do you have any idea what it's like to live in your father's shadow for 32 years? His voice cracked with decades of suppressed resentment and inadequacy. "To watch him build a business empire while treating you like you're some kind of incompetent child who can't be trusted with real responsibility. Son, I'm warning you." Richard's voice lacked its usual commanding authority, replaced by the desperate panic of a man watching his family's reputation destroyed in real time. But Marcus was beyond listening to warnings or threats, the words pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. "The merger was supposed to be my chance to prove myself, to show him that I could handle something important without screwing it up. Charlotte was brilliant, innovative, everything Father always said I wasn't. Her company was the perfect acquisition target, but she would never sell to us on terms that would let me prove my worth." Charlotte felt physically sick as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrible clarity. "So you decided to have me killed instead of earning my respect through honest business practices." Marcus's laugh was bitter and completely devoid of humor, the sound of someone who'd gambled everything and lost. "It was supposed to look like a natural heart attack. David has medical training from his EMT certification. He knew exactly how much fentanyl to use to stop your heart without leaving obvious traces. With you gone, your company would have been in chaos, stock prices plummeting, board members panicking. We could have acquired Mason Technologies for pennies on the dollar within a month." The casual way he discussed her murder, as if it were just another business transaction to be optimized for maximum profit, made Charlotte's stomach turn with revulsion. "And you were willing to destroy an innocent family to accomplish this?" "David volunteered," Marcus protested, as if that somehow made kidnapping and murder acceptable. "When we approached him about infiltrating high-end restaurants to gather intelligence on business deals, he was desperate for money to help his sister get into college. We offered him $50,000 just to listen and report back on conversations. He had no idea we were planning anything violent." Detective Chen stepped forward, her expression hardening with professional disgust. "But then you escalated to kidnapping his sister to force him to commit murder." Marcus's facade finally cracked completely, revealing the spoiled, entitled man-child underneath the expensive suits and practiced charm. She was never supposed to be hurt. Rosa was just insurance, motivation to make sure David followed through. After Charlotte died and we acquired her company, we were going to release her unharmed and pay David his money plus a bonus for his cooperation. Emily, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation with the kind of intense focus that had saved Charlotte's life, tugged gently on Charlotte's elegant skirt to get her attention. "Senora Angel," she whispered, her voice carrying the wisdom that came from surviving trauma. "Are you going to be okay now? Are the bad men going to jail so they can't hurt anybody else?" Charlotte knelt down to Emily's level, her eyes filling with tears she hadn't realized were gathering as the full emotional impact of the day finally hit her. This brave, observant little girl had risked everything to save a complete stranger, speaking up against powerful adults who could have easily dismissed her as a nuisance or had her removed by security. "Yes, sweetheart, thanks to you being so brave and so smart, I'm going to be perfectly fine. And the bad men are definitely going to jail for a very long time." Emily nodded solemnly, then surprised Charlotte by wrapping her small arms around her neck in a fierce hug that smelled like sunshine and courage and the kind of unconditional love that couldn't be bought at any price. "I'm glad, Senora Angel. You seem like a really good person who helps people, and good people shouldn't get hurt by bad people if I can stop it." As the police led Marcus away in handcuffs, his protests about lawyers and constitutional rights echoing through the elegant space, Charlotte realized that her problems were far from over. If Marcus could orchestrate something this elaborate and ruthless, what other enemies might be hiding in the shadows of her success, waiting for their chance to strike? But more immediately, what was she going to do about the remarkable child who had just saved her life? Emily and her father were clearly struggling, living on the margins of society without the resources or opportunities that Charlotte had always taken for granted. The least she could do was make sure they were safe and supported. But something deep in her heart was telling her that this meeting was about more than just coincidence or charity. Looking into Emily's bright blue eyes, Charlotte had the strangest feeling that their lives had just become permanently intertwined in ways she couldn't yet understand. The real surprises were just beginning, and somehow she knew that this 7-year-old girl was going to change her world in ways that no business deal or acquisition ever could. The foundation of everything she thought she knew about her life was about to shift, and Emily Santos was going to be at the center of it all. 3 weeks after the incident at the patisserie, Charlotte sat in her corner office on the 52nd floor of the Mason Technologies building, staring out at the Manhattan skyline while her mind wrestled with decisions that would change multiple lives forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across her mahogany desk, illuminating the stack of legal documents that would formalize her offer to hire Miguel Santos and sponsor his family's immigration status. Detective Chen had called an hour earlier with updates that made Charlotte's chest tight with emotion. David's sister Rosa had been found safe in a warehouse in Queens, traumatized but physically unharmed. Marcus Blackstone was facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and a dozen other felonies that would likely keep him in prison for the rest of his life. His father Richard claimed complete ignorance of the plot, and investigators had found no evidence linking him to his son's crimes, though the scandal had already devastated Blackstone Industries' stock price and reputation. But it was the other call Charlotte had received that morning that had truly shaken her world. Dr. Margaret Foster, the child psychologist she'd hired to evaluate Emily, had requested an urgent meeting to discuss test results that she described as unprecedented in 30 years of practice. The intercom buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. "Ms. Mason, Dr. Foster is here with Mr. Santos and Emily," her assistant, Linda, announced. "Send them in, please." Miguel entered first, looking uncomfortable in the new clothes Charlotte had insisted on buying for him. Dark slacks, a pressed white shirt, and a navy blazer that made him look like the successful professional she was determined to help him become. His weathered hands still bore the calluses of years in construction, but his posture carried new confidence that came from having steady work and hope for the future. Emily bounded in behind her father, her transformation even more dramatic. Gone were the tattered clothes and tangled hair, replaced by a blue dress that matched her remarkable eyes and hair that had been professionally styled into soft curls. But her most striking change wasn't physical. It was the bright curiosity in her expression, the excitement of a brilliant mind finally being challenged and nurtured. Dr. Foster followed, a distinguished woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of penetrating gaze that came from decades of understanding how children's minds worked. She carried a thick folder of test results and notes, her expression mixing professional excitement with something that looked almost like concern. "Emily, sweetheart, why don't you explore the office while the adults talk?" Charlotte suggested, gesturing toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. Emily nodded and skipped toward the windows, immediately pressing her face against the glass to watch the tiny cars and people far below. But Charlotte noticed that the child's body language suggested she was listening intently to every word of their conversation, her head tilted at an angle that indicated exceptional auditory processing. Dr. Foster opened her folder with the careful precision of someone delivering news that would change everything. "Charlotte, in 30 years of evaluating gifted children, I've never encountered anything quite like Emily. Her test results are extraordinary." Miguel leaned forward, his English still accented but much improved after 3 weeks of intensive tutoring. "Is she okay? Is there something wrong with her mind?" "Wrong? No, Mr. Santos. Emily's mind is one of the most remarkable I've ever studied." Dr. Foster pulled out a chart covered in numbers and graphs. Her IQ tests at 187, which places her in the top 0.001% of the population. But more than raw intelligence, she demonstrates what we call pattern recognition genius, the ability to see connections and predict outcomes that escape even trained professionals. Charlotte felt her breath catch. That's how she knew about the poison. She didn't just observe what David was doing, she understood what it meant. Exactly. Emily's brain processes visual, auditory, and contextual information simultaneously, in ways that allow her to construct complete narratives from seemingly unrelated details. Dr. Foster turned to another page. When I showed her photographs of people in various emotional states, she could predict their next actions with 94% accuracy. When I played recordings of conversations with subtle deceptions, She identified every lie. Miguel's eyes filled with tears of pride and confusion. She always knew things she shouldn't know. When Elena was getting sick, Emily would know which medicines would help and which would make her feel worse. The doctors thought she was guessing, but she was never wrong. Emily turned from the window, her young face serious. I don't guess, Papa. I see patterns like music in people's faces and voices. When someone is going to do something bad, the music gets all twisted and scary. The casual way she described her extraordinary ability made Charlotte's skin tingle with recognition. This child didn't just have high intelligence, she had a form of intuitive perception that bordered on the supernatural, though Dr. Foster was careful to frame it in scientific terms. Emily also demonstrates what we call compensatory hyperdevelopment, Dr. Foster continued. Children who experience early trauma sometimes develop enhanced observational skills as a survival mechanism. In Emily's case, losing her mother and living in unstable conditions has actually accelerated certain cognitive developments. Charlotte stood and walked to the window where Emily was now tracing patterns on the glass with her finger, complex geometric shapes that looked almost like mathematical equations. Emily, can you tell me what you see when you look at people? Emily considered the question with the seriousness of a much older person. It's like everyone has invisible strings connecting them to other people and to things that are going to happen. Most grown-ups can't see the strings, so they get surprised when things happen. But I can see them, so I know what's coming. The explanation was so matter-of-fact, delivered in the voice of a 7-year-old, that it should have sounded like childish fantasy. Instead, it made perfect sense of everything Charlotte had witnessed. Dr. Foster closed her folder and fixed Charlotte with an intense stare. Emily needs specialized education immediately. Her mind is developing at an exponential rate, and without proper stimulation and guidance, she could become overwhelmed by her own abilities. I've seen gifted children withdraw from the world when their perceptions become too intense to handle. Miguel reached for his daughter's hand, pulling her close to his side. What kind of education? We have no money for special schools. Charlotte had been waiting for this moment, the opportunity to propose something that would benefit everyone involved. Actually, I have an idea about that. Miguel, you know I offered you a position in our corporate security division. What you might not know is that I'm planning to establish a new department, something I'm calling predictive risk analysis. She moved to her desk and pulled out architectural plans for a new wing of the Mason Technologies building. I want to create a program that uses advanced pattern recognition to predict everything from market trends to security threats to employee behavior patterns. It's cutting-edge stuff that could revolutionize how corporations understand and manage risk. Miguel looked confused, but Emily's eyes lit up with understanding. You want me to help find patterns in your business like I found the pattern that saved you from the poison man? Exactly. Charlotte knelt to Emily's level, speaking directly to the brilliant child. But first, you need education. I want to establish a special learning center right here in the building, with teachers who understand how gifted minds work. You'd have access to advanced mathematics, multiple languages, computer programming, psychology, anything that interests you. Dr. Foster nodded approvingly. That's exactly what she needs. Emily's mind is like a high-performance engine that requires premium fuel. Standard educational approaches would be like trying to run a race car on regular gasoline. Emily looked between the adults, processing the implications with her characteristic intensity. Papa, does this mean we get to stay together? And I get to keep helping people like I helped Señora Charlotte? Miguel's voice was thick with emotion as he pulled his daughter into a fierce hug. Sí, mija. We stay together, and you get to use your special gift to help people. But Charlotte noticed something in Emily's expression, a fleeting shadow that suggested the child was seeing patterns that worried her. Emily, is something troubling you? Emily hesitated, then looked directly at Charlotte with those unsettling blue eyes. The bad man who tried to hurt you. His strings aren't broken yet. There are more people connected to him. People who are angry that their plan didn't work. The danger music is still playing, Señora Charlotte. The words sent a chill down Charlotte's spine. If Emily's abilities were as accurate as Dr. Foster suggested, then Marcus Blackstone's arrest might not have ended the threat against her life. What kind of danger, sweetheart? Can you tell me more about what you're seeing? Emily closed her eyes, her small face scrunched in concentration as if listening to music only she could hear. There's a woman with silver hair and cold eyes. She's very angry about something that happened a long time ago, something connected to your family. She thinks you took something that belonged to her. Charlotte felt her blood turn to ice. The description could fit dozens of people, but something about it triggered a memory she'd been trying to suppress for months. Strange phone calls, unusual questions about her grandmother's estate, legal documents that seemed to go missing from her attorney's office. Dr. Foster was taking notes rapidly. "Emily, how certain are you about these perceptions?" "Very certain," Emily said without hesitation. "The strings are bright red, which means danger is coming soon. Maybe in a few days, maybe next week, but definitely coming." Miguel's protective instincts flared immediately. "Then we should call the police, warn them." "No, Papa." Emily shook her head with surprising firmness. "The police strings are all tangled up with legal strings and political strings. They won't believe us until something bad happens first. We have to be smart and careful and watch for the patterns ourselves." Charlotte realized that her decision to help Emily and Miguel had just become far more complicated than a simple act of charity. She was now responsible for protecting a child with extraordinary abilities, while that same child was warning her of threats that conventional security measures might not detect. But as she looked at Emily's determined face and Miguel's fierce loyalty, Charlotte felt something she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's death, the sense of being part of a real family, bound together by something stronger than blood or legal obligation. Whatever dangers were coming, they would face them together. And with Emily's remarkable gift guiding them, they might just have a chance of staying one step ahead of their enemies. The real test was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Charlotte's prediction proved accurate in the most terrifying way possible. She was working late in her office reviewing security protocols with Miguel, when Emily, who had been quietly doing advanced calculus problems at a corner desk, suddenly looked up with an expression of pure terror. "They're here," Emily whispered, her voice cutting through the evening silence like a blade. The silver-haired woman and 2 men with gun-shaped bulges under their jackets. "They're in the elevator right now, coming up to this floor." Charlotte's blood turned to ice as she reached for the emergency button that would alert building security, but Emily shook her head frantically. "No, Senora Charlotte. The security guard downstairs is sleeping at his desk. Someone put something in his coffee. These people know exactly how to get around your normal protection." Miguel immediately moved to shield his daughter, his construction-hardened muscles tensing for a fight he knew he couldn't win. "How many floors down are they?" Emily closed her eyes, tilting her head as if listening to sounds no one else could hear. 38, 39. They're moving fast and they're very angry. The woman is talking to someone on a phone, giving orders in a language that sounds like Russian. Charlotte's mind raced through possibilities as she grabbed her purse and the emergency bag she'd started keeping in her office ever since Emily's first warning. "The stairwell. We can get to the roof and—" "No." Emily's voice carried absolute certainty. "They have someone waiting in the stairwell on the 45th floor, and someone else on the roof. They've been planning this for days, watching all your patterns, learning how you move through the building." The elevator dinged softly in the distance, announcing the arrival of people who wanted Charlotte dead. Miguel pulled Emily behind Charlotte's large desk, the most solid cover available, while Charlotte's mind frantically searched for options that didn't exist. "Emily," Charlotte whispered urgently, "what do you see? What are our chances?" Emily's young face was pale but determined as she processed information streams that would overwhelm most adults. "The woman's name is Katerina Volkov. She's very good at hurting people, and she's been waiting 23 years to hurt your family specifically. She knows things about your grandmother that you don't know." The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow, confirming suspicions that had been growing in her mind ever since Emily's first warning. "What things about my grandmother?" "Your grandmother took something very valuable from Katerina's family when they were young women in Russia. Something worth millions of dollars that Katerina has been trying to get back her whole life. She thought it died with your grandmother, but then you became famous and successful, and she realized the money was probably still somewhere in your family." Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, moving with the careful precision of professionals who knew exactly where they were going. Charlotte could hear low voices speaking in what did sound like Russian, confirming Emily's impossible knowledge. "The thing is," Emily continued in a voice barely above a whisper, "Katerina is wrong about what your grandmother took. It wasn't money or jewels or anything she could steal back. It was information, names and numbers of people who did very bad things during a war a long time ago." Charlotte's breath caught as pieces of her family's mysterious past suddenly clicked into place. Her grandmother Eleanor had always been secretive about her childhood in Eastern Europe, changing the subject whenever Charlotte asked about her accent or why they had no relatives. Now, facing imminent death, Charlotte was finally learning the truth. "Your grandmother was a war orphan who worked for the American government, helping them identify Nazi collaborators and Soviet spies after World War II. Emily explained with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reciting historical facts she'd somehow absorbed through osmosis. Katerina's father was one of the people whose crimes your grandmother documented. He died in prison because of information your grandmother provided to the Americans. The footsteps stopped directly outside the office door. Charlotte could hear someone testing the handle, which she'd thankfully remembered to lock when Miguel arrived for their evening security review. Miguel pulled both Charlotte and Emily deeper behind the desk, his voice barely audible. "Is there any way out of this that doesn't end with us getting hurt?" Emily closed her eyes again, her small face scrunched in intense concentration. "There's one pattern that leads to safety, but it's very dangerous and requires perfect timing. Senora Charlotte, do you trust me completely?" Charlotte looked into the child's extraordinary blue eyes and saw wisdom that had nothing to do with her 7 years on Earth, with my life. "Then when I say now, you need to press the fire alarm and then immediately call a very specific phone number. The number is 555-0147, and when someone answers, you need to say exactly these words. Eleanor's granddaughter needs immediate extraction under Protocol 7. Charlotte stared at Emily in amazement. "How could you possibly know?" "I don't know how I know it," Emily admitted, her voice carrying the frustration of someone whose abilities exceeded her understanding. "The numbers and words just appeared in my mind when I asked the patterns how to save us. Sometimes information comes to me from places I can't explain." The lock clicked softly as someone used professional tools to defeat the security mechanism. Charlotte's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized they were out of time for explanations or doubts. Emily held up her small hand, fingers spread as she counted down silently. 5, 4, 3, 2. "Now!" Charlotte slammed her palm against the fire alarm button just as the office door swung open, revealing exactly what Emily had predicted. A silver-haired woman in her 60s with eyes like Arctic ice, flanked by 2 men whose expensive suits couldn't quite hide the weapons beneath their jackets. As piercing alarms filled the building and emergency lights began flashing, Charlotte speed-dialed the impossible number Emily had somehow known, her fingers shaking as she wondered if she was about to make the last phone call of her life. The phone was answered on the first ring by a crisp male voice with a slight southern accent. Identification and status. "Eleanor's granddaughter needs immediate extraction under Protocol 7. Charlotte repeated Emily's exact words, feeling like an actor in a play she didn't understand. The line went silent for 3 seconds that felt like hours. Then, "Confirmed. Stay exactly where you are. Extraction team is 90 seconds out." Katerina Volkov's voice cut through the alarm noise with the kind of authority that came from decades of intimidating people into submission. "Charlotte Mason, you're going to come with us voluntarily, or we're going to kill your friends and then take you anyway. Your choice." Emily suddenly stood up from behind the desk, her small form looking impossibly fragile next to the armed professionals who had come to commit murder. "You can't have her, Mrs. Volkov. And you're wrong about the treasure you're looking for." Katerina's Arctic eyes widened with shock that a 7-year-old had not only identified her by name, but seemed to know details about her decades-long quest for revenge. "How could you possibly? Your father wasn't executed because of what Charlotte's grandmother told the Americans," Emily continued with the calm certainty of someone stating mathematical facts. "He was executed because your mother turned him in to save her own life. Eleanor Mason tried to save your father, but your mother's betrayal reached the authorities first." The words hit Katerina like physical blows, her composed expression cracking to reveal decades of misdirected rage and grief. "That's impossible. My mother died defending my father. Your mother lived until 1987 in a small town in Montana under the name Susan Foster," Emily said gently. "She spent 40 years trying to find you, to explain what really happened, but you disappeared into the criminal world and changed your name too many times for her to track you down." Charlotte watched in amazement as Emily systematically dismantled the foundation of hatred that had driven Katerina's quest for revenge. The child was doing more than reciting facts. She was performing a kind of psychological surgery, using truth as a scalpel to cut away decades of festering anger. Katerina's hands were shaking now, her professional composure completely shattered. "You're lying. Children don't know things like this." The office windows suddenly exploded inward as black-clad figures rappelled from the roof, moving with the precision of a military unit that had performed this exact type of rescue dozens of times. Within seconds, Katerina and her men were on the ground with their hands secured behind their backs, while a team leader with lieutenant stripes approached Charlotte with professional efficiency. Ms. Mason, I'm Lieutenant Rodriguez, Special Operations Division. Your grandmother's legacy protocols are still active, and we've been monitoring potential threats against you for months. Are you and your companions injured? Charlotte stared at the surreal scene around her. Armed criminals neutralized, mysterious government agents securing her office, and a 7-year-old girl who had somehow orchestrated their rescue using knowledge that should have been impossible for her to possess. We're fine, but I don't understand what just happened. What legacy protocols? What did my grandmother really do? Lieutenant Rodriguez glanced at Emily, who nodded as if giving permission for classified information to be revealed. Your grandmother, Eleanor, was one of our most valuable intelligence assets during the Cold War. When she died, she left specific instructions for protecting her family if certain enemies ever surfaced. Tonight was the activation of those protocols. Emily tugged on Charlotte's sleeve, her young face serious with concern. Senora Charlotte, there's something else you need to know about your family's past. Something that explains why you and I found each other when we did. As the Special Operations team led Katerina Volkov away in restraints, the woman's Arctic eyes fixed on Emily with a mixture of hatred and recognition that sent chills through Charlotte's body. This isn't over, little girl, Katerina whispered as she passed. You may have unusual abilities, but there are others like you, and not all of them are on your side. Emily met her gaze without flinching. I know about the others, Mrs. Volkov, and I know they're coming, but that's a problem for tomorrow. As the office fell silent except for the diminishing wail of fire alarms, Charlotte realized that her life had just changed in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. Emily's abilities were apparently connected to a larger world of secrets and conflicts that her grandmother had been part of for decades. The little girl who had saved her life was apparently much more than a remarkably gifted child. She was connected to mysteries that went back generations and forward into dangers that hadn't yet revealed themselves. The biggest revelations were still to come. 6 months later, Charlotte sat in the beautifully appointed conference room of the newly established Santos Mason Institute for Cognitive Development, watching Emily work with 3 other exceptionally gifted children who had been quietly referred to their program by government agencies that officially didn't exist. The changes in Emily were remarkable. At 8 years old now, she moved with the confidence of someone who understood her abilities and was learning to use them responsibly. Her English had become flawless, peppered with technical terms from the advanced courses she'd been taking, but she'd retained the warmth and compassion that had motivated her to save Charlotte's life that day in the patisserie. Miguel had transformed as well, his role as Director of Predictive Security making him one of the most sought-after consultants in corporate America. His English had improved dramatically, and his understanding of advanced security systems now rivaled that of professionals with decades more experience. But most importantly, the haunted look of desperation had left his eyes, replaced by the quiet confidence of a man who could provide for his daughter's extraordinary needs. Charlotte, you need to see this. Dr. Foster called from across the room, where she'd been monitoring Emily's work with pattern recognition software. Charlotte approached the wall of monitors that displayed complex data streams Emily had been analyzing: stock market fluctuations, international news feeds, social media trends, and government security briefings that had been declassified for their research. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Emily had constructed a 3-dimensional model that connected seemingly unrelated events across 6 continents, showing how economic instability in Eastern Europe was connected to technological developments in Silicon Valley, which were connected to political movements in South America, all building toward what the model predicted would be a major global crisis within the next 18 months. How is this possible? Charlotte whispered. She's 8 years old. Chronologically, yes, Dr. Foster replied, her voice filled with the wonder that never quite left when she observed Emily's work. But cognitively, Emily is processing information at levels that challenge our understanding of human potential. And more than that, she seems to be accessing information streams that shouldn't be available to anyone outside the highest levels of government intelligence. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had become a regular presence at the Institute as the government's liaison for their classified projects, approached with a tablet displaying reports from around the world. She's not wrong about the global crisis prediction. Our best analysts have been tracking similar patterns, but it took them 6 months of collaborative work to reach conclusions Emily generated in 3 days. Emily looked up from her workstation, her blue eyes bright with excitement but shadowed by the weight of knowledge that would be crushing for most adults to carry. The patterns are getting clearer, Charlotte. The people who sent Mrs. Volkov after you are part of something much bigger than revenge. They're connected to a network that's been manipulating global events for decades, trying to create chaos so they can profit from the rebuilding. Charlotte sat down beside Emily, still struggling to reconcile the child's apparent innocence with the sophisticated intelligence that seemed to pour from her effortlessly. Emily, how do you know these things? Where does this information come from? Emily considered the question with her characteristic seriousness, then spoke with the kind of honesty that only children possessed. I think my brain works like a radio that can pick up signals most people can't hear. When I focus on a problem, information just appears in my mind from places I can't identify. Dr. Foster says it might be a form of quantum consciousness, where my neurons are somehow connected to information fields that exist beyond normal space and time. The explanation sounded like science fiction, but Charlotte had learned to trust Emily's insights even when they challenged conventional understanding. The child's ability to predict events, understand people's motivations, and connect disparate pieces of information had proven accurate so many times that questioning the source seemed less important than acting on the results. Miguel approached their group, carrying a folder of documents that made his expression grave with concern. Charlotte, we have a problem. The background checks on the new staff members have revealed something troubling. Emily immediately looked up from her work, her face shifting into the focused intensity that meant she was processing threat patterns. It's Dr. Harrison, isn't it, the new child psychologist who specializes in gifted education? Miguel nodded, impressed as always by his daughter's ability to identify problems before they fully manifested. How did you know? Her smile never reaches her eyes, and she asks too many questions about our security procedures, Emily explained matter-of-factly. Also, she has the same kind of invisible strings connecting her to dangerous people that Mrs. Volkov had. Different dangerous people, but the same dark music around them. Lieutenant Rodriguez immediately activated his secure communication device, speaking in rapid, coded phrases to unseen colleagues. Within minutes, the Institute's security protocols shifted to high alert, with armed agents taking positions throughout the building. Dr. Foster, who had been reviewing Dr. Harrison's credentials, looked up with alarm. According to this background check, Dr. Harrison's doctoral thesis was on identifying and exploiting cognitive anomalies in exceptional children. That's not educational research. That's intelligence-gathering methodology. Charlotte felt sick as the implications became clear. Someone had infiltrated their carefully protected environment, someone with the credentials and expertise to get close to Emily and the other gifted children in their care. Emily, are we in immediate danger? Emily closed her eyes, her small face scrunched in concentration as she accessed whatever information streams guided her extraordinary insights. Dr. Harrison is in the building right now, in the basement level, doing something with the computer servers that connect to our databases. She's not alone. There are 3 other people with her, and they have equipment that looks like it's designed to copy information. Lieutenant Rodriguez was already moving toward the elevator, speaking rapidly into his communication device. All units, we have hostile infiltration in the basement server room. Lock down the building and prepare for extraction of priority assets. But Emily suddenly grabbed Charlotte's arm with surprising strength, her eyes wide with urgent warning. Don't let them take us out of the building. I can see the patterns. There are people waiting outside, people who want to capture children like me and use our abilities for terrible things. The safest place right now is exactly where we are. Charlotte found herself faced with a choice between trusting government agents with decades of experience or believing an 8-year-old girl whose abilities she still didn't fully understand. The decision took less than a second. Lieutenant, we're staying put, she announced with the authority that had built her business empire. Emily's predictions have never been wrong, and I'm not going to start doubting her now. Rodriguez looked frustrated but nodded his acceptance. Then we secure this floor and wait for backup. But Ms. Mason, if your young advisor is wrong about this, she won't be, Charlotte interrupted, her confidence in Emily absolute despite the extraordinary nature of the situation. Emily smiled at Charlotte's faith in her abilities, then turned to the group of other gifted children who had been quietly observing the crisis unfold. We need to work together on this one. Sarah, can you calculate the optimal defensive positions for the security team? Marcus, I need you to hack into the building's camera system so we can monitor the infiltrators. Anna, use your linguistic analysis abilities to decode their communications. Charlotte watched in amazement as Emily coordinated the efforts of children whose combined intellectual capabilities probably exceeded those of most university research departments. Within minutes, they had transformed the conference room into a sophisticated command center, with real-time intelligence flowing from sources throughout the building. "Charlotte," Emily said quietly, pulling her aside while the other children worked with focused intensity. "There's something else I need to tell you about why we found each other that day at the patisserie." "What do you mean?" Emily's expression carried the weight of knowledge that went beyond her years, understanding that connected to mysteries, Charlotte was only beginning to glimpse. "My mother, Elena, wasn't just sick before she died. She had abilities similar to mine, but she never learned to control them properly. The visions and information streams overwhelmed her, and she used alcohol and pills to make them stop." Charlotte felt tears gathering in her eyes as she understood the tragic implications. She saw patterns that she couldn't handle, and it drove her to despair. "But before she died, she had one very clear vision about my future," Emily continued, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone she used for her most important revelations. "She saw me saving a woman with green eyes and dark hair, a woman whose family had secrets that connected to dangerous people from the past. She said that woman would become like a second mother to me, and together we would protect other children who had abilities like mine." The words hit Charlotte with the force of destiny recognized, explaining the immediate connection she'd felt to Emily and Miguel, the sense that their meeting had been orchestrated by forces beyond coincidence or chance. As sirens wailed outside and armed agents secured the building floor by floor, Charlotte realized that her life had been moving toward this moment from the day her grandmother died. The little girl who had saved her from assassination had also saved her from a life of lonely success, giving her a family and a purpose that money could never buy. Emily was right about the patterns that connected their lives, the invisible strings that had brought them together at exactly the right moment. But more than that, Charlotte finally understood that her role wasn't just to provide Emily with opportunities and protection. It was to help her use her extraordinary gifts to protect other exceptional children from those who would exploit their abilities. Looking around the room at the young minds working together to solve problems that challenged trained professionals, Charlotte felt a profound sense of completion. This was what her grandmother's legacy had been building toward, what all the secrets and sacrifices had been meant to protect. The institute they'd created wasn't just an educational facility. It was a sanctuary for children whose minds worked in ways the world was only beginning to understand, and a fortress against those who would use such gifts for destructive purposes. As Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom announcing that the infiltrators had been captured and the building was secure, Emily looked up at Charlotte with eyes that sparkled with affection and wisdom far beyond her years. "Thank you for believing in me, Señora Charlotte," she said softly, "for seeing more than just a homeless girl who needed help." Charlotte knelt down and pulled Emily into a fierce hug, her heart overflowing with love for the remarkable child who had not only saved her life but had given her life meaning she'd never imagined possible. "Thank you for saving me in every way a person can be saved," Charlotte whispered back, "and for showing me that the most important patterns in life are the ones that connect hearts, not bank accounts." Outside, the sun was setting over Manhattan, casting golden light through the windows of the Santos Mason Institute. Inside, a family forged by destiny rather than blood looked toward a future where exceptional children would be protected, nurtured, and helped to use their gifts for the betterment of humanity. The little angel's work was just beginning, but the foundation for miracles had been firmly established. And in a world that often seemed chaotic and unpredictable, that was the most beautiful pattern of all.